All right. Gonna do another episode tonight talking about the Texas border situation. I've been talking about it quite a bit, but I only have so much time to make episodes, and I cover what I think is the most important. And right now, this is it. I mean, the stuff going on in Ukraine, stuff with Israel, all that stuff is also interesting. But I live in Texas. I'm afraid of a potential war, and so this is kind of the stuff that tends to draw my attention. So if I'm gonna make a one episode, if I'm gonna make one episode per night, then this is what I'm gonna focus on then. So, starting off with Scanner News, Tim Pool's outlet, Senator Cruz says Biden's handling of the border crisis makes Obama's border crisis look minuscule. And when you read through the article, it basically makes sense. And so it kind of gets to the point when you get closer down to the bottom, or yeah, around here. So so the precedent set by Obama is that he would parole about 5,000 illegal immigrants every year when they cross the border legally. Biden's doing 800,000 per year. Trump, to my disappointment, as I learned from this article, similar number to Obama, about 5,000. I think he should have done far less, but it is what it is. I think no illegal immigrants should be getting paroled, or next to zero, pretty much next to zero. Um, so yeah, that's where we're going to start. Apparently, Obama, according to Ted Cruz, wasn't that bad. I think Obama was still pretty bad. That's my opinion. Like, he mentions this whole DACA thing, the Deferred Action for Child Arrivals, completely illegal. President doesn't get to do that, in my opinion. It should have been overturned or it should have been good done away with when Trump tried, but of course the Supreme Court is pathetic and they went along with it. I think we also have to remember that Obama also tried to do the deferred action for parental arrivals. That way they could also keep the parents with the kids, which is even worse in my opinion. Well, all the options are worse. Really, no illegal immigrants should be in the U.S. Parents and children should be deported out of the country. Now, does get tough when you have like a child that doesn't have any parents. I think there's some ethical questions there. I think an effort should be made to find the parents before you send the child back. That's not an easy one to answer, in my opinion. But in a situation where a family shows up, like two parents and a child, or a parent and a child, keep the children and the parents together, and they all get deported at the same time. Just very simple stuff. Anyhow, moving on. Yeah, so some more stuff. Wait, this wasn't the story I wanted to focus on. This was just another thing I had pulled up. Move that over. Oh yeah, did some quick reading or research with Grok to figure out about the border deal being discussed in Congress right now. Joe Biden has made a daring promise that he will shut down the border if there's more than 5,000 people per day. But from what we know, it's not entirely true. So, well, it is true. So, if 5,000 people show up in a single day, the border gets shut down for the rest of the day. But according to my understanding, if it opens up the next day. So it's still kind of a crappy situation. So CNN Politics and Biden's pledge to shut down the border, he promises to shut down the border in a stunning political shift. So President Joe Biden's evolution on the key election issue of immigration entered a new phase when he promised to shut down the border right now if given new powers by Congress. The deeper policy context of the comments delivered at a campaign event in South Carolina Saturday and in a statement from the White House on Friday is that Biden wants to resuscitate a bipartisan deal to pair new border powers with additional military aid for Ukraine and Israel. On the surface, it kind of makes sense. My preference would be that we just actually deport people, we enforce the border, and I would be willing to send money to Ukraine if for every $1 that goes to Ukraine, we get $1 towards actually getting rid of illegal immigrants and defending the border. I mean, that would be more of a compromise. It's not a great deal, but at least something would be getting done at least I would be getting something rather than getting nothing, I should say. Anyhow, they're calling his rhetoric Trump-like, and the fact that the Democrats are not even talking about a pathway to a legal status for undocumented immigrants currently in the country is also an important political admission as immigration-focused Donald Trump zeroes in on the Republican presidential nomination and the border crisis reverberates through the country and into Washington, D.C. Well, no kidding, it's reverberating around the country. You have people in major urban centers freaking out over the fact that you have tons of illegal immigrants coming in. They're talking about building camps for these people because they can't house them anywhere. Of course they're going to freak out about it. I mean, immigration's become a bigger issue than inflation, which, I mean, if you have more immigrants competing for jobs, it's going to drive inflation. Or it'll depress wages, at least, because they'll accept any job because they're they have no roots in the country. They're looking for some, so they'll take any line of work. That makes it harder for normal Americans to get work, and therefore, if there's more demand in the labor market, that means that employers can pay employees less. Anyhow, CNN keeps going on, basically accusing Trump of wanting to kill the bipartisan deal. Let's move on to the next story. Washington Times. Senate border deal would allow 5,000 illegal immigrants a day. Leaked details of a deal spark revolt within the GOP. Conservative activists are recoiling as details leak from the immigration deal being negotiated in the Senate, suggesting illegal border crossings will be immediately eligible for work permits, and the government will allow up to 5,000 illegal immigrants a day before expulsion powers take effect. Negotiators have tightly guarded plans during their weeks of talks, but Rosemary Jenks, Government Relations Director at the Immigration Accountability Project, said she has been briefed by multiple people familiar with the negotiations and has seen sharing details online. Man, words don't want to work for me tonight. She said the deal based on those outlines would do little to derail the unprecedented number of illegal immigrants pouring across the border. I think we'd be lucky if it didn't increase, she told the Washington Times. There's nothing in this that I have seen or been told about that stops catch and release. Her version of the bill has scorched through conservative circles, and activists are rallying to demand that Republicans back out of the talks. Their chief target is Senator James Lankford, the Oklahoma lawmaker serving as Republicans' lead negotiator. So, yeah, that's the concern, that you're going to be essentially having like 5,000 illegal immigrants per day just pouring into the country. That would suck. You shouldn't have to take 5,000 illegal immigrants per day before you shut down the border. I haven't been able to see the full text yet, but based off of what I do know, I think the border deal is a sham. I don't trust Biden. Now let's get to the more interesting stuff. There are some people who have been talking about like civil war, secession, that sort of thing. I don't know. Some people are, in my opinion, take it way too cavalier. They're way too willing to engage in that kind of talk, and I think that's incredibly risky. I mean, we've already seen what happened to January 6th. If you were so much as in the Capitol on that day, there's a good chance the FBI has already visited you. So I think that this idea of, like, going along with some sort of secession, incredibly risky. Now, I'll admit, I'm worried that some sort of war could happen. That doesn't mean I would call for one. I think that there's a number of problems with that. Number one, war is terrible, but, you know, I understand that people are incredibly upset. Incredibly upset people do stupid things. So, I think it's important that people keep their heads on their shoulders and not do anything rash. We're going to read this from Martin Armstrong. Texas can survive as the Lone Star State. Well, yes, it can. If we could magically just accomplish a national divorce or a secession that involves absolutely zero conflict, then yeah, Texas would have the capacity to exist. It has a population of 30 million people. That's not as much as somewhere like, say, France with over 60 million. I think we would need more than 30 to have a bit more sway on the international scale, but it's still a very workable number. Defending all that border would be very hard because you're no longer just defending from Mexico. You're also defending from anywhere that might be touching that's still the United States. But we have access to oil. We have access to oil refineries. We have our own electrical grid. We have manufacturing. Well, some manufacturing. But like we have real economic opportunities here. Texas would be able to make it. Anyhow, most importantly, Texas has oil and gas and refining capacity and would continue to produce and refine fossil fuels. Without Texas, the United States would not be able to wage war, lacking the energy to fuel its tanks. Texas could stand on its own, and to ensure energy, the other red states would join hands against Washington. Well, there's a good chance of that, because Texas has, 40 electoral votes? No other red state would ever... The red states will never win a presidential election again, ever. 40 is a big deal. The only state that has more is California. Florida is behind us with just 30. And I think New York also has 30. So it's if that happens, then there's a good chance that tons of red states just step away with Texas. And the U.S. oil refineries, they're all along the Gulf Coast. And there's a logical reason for that. It's very hot down here along the Gulf Coast. Hot and humid for most of the year. We have our winter months, sure. It's cool, but it rarely gets below freezing. Like if it does, it's for a short period of time. Now, when that comes to like refining oil, that makes it a lot easier because you have to like heat up oil in the refining process. But if it's already warm, you don't have to burn as much fuel in order to heat it up. Makes sense. In a place like Russia, where they refine their own oil, but they have to actively burn product in order to heat that oil up. So therefore, it's a lot harder for them. Where they have to burn more product because it's just so darn cold over there. We're along the Gulf Coast. We have access to oil. We're already plenty warm as it is. That helps out a lot. But yeah, it's not just Texas as oil refineries, like all the Gulf states. So essentially, that would cripple the U.S. And not only that, but when you want to refine oil, like if you pump it out in Alberta, if you pump it out of Pennsylvania, and you want like all the oil pipelines, wherever the source is, it runs down to the Gulf Coast and then it'll run back up north to wherever they need it. It's a simple delivery system and it's logical because it's like, well, that's where the refineries are. You have to get the raw product to the refinery and then get the refined product back up north. So the prospect of being able to somehow, or the prospect of, like, the U.S. would suffer without the red states or the Gulf Coast states. Like, there's a lot of infrastructure here, and then that's not even getting into the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And I'll just pull that up real quick. We're going to do Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, what it is, where is it? Maps. No, that's no good. Images. Yeah, you can never really find it when you're looking for it. Anyhow, what it is essentially between Texas and Louisiana, there's a bunch of old underground salt formations, right, that the U.S. discovered a long time ago. Well, what we do is we pump them full of raw oil, and we store the oil inside those salt formations. Now, when we need oil, we pump the oil out and we refine it, and then we have oil. We have oil products. Great deal, right? But if Texas secedes and takes the red states with it, then the U.S. loses access to one of the world's largest reserves of fuel, right? I mean, we bust this stuff out in times of war. Biden's been busting out plenty to help manage the fuel prices because he sucks at being able to get energy for the U.S. because he keeps, one, ticking off all the countries that are good at producing this stuff, and number two, he doesn't really want to let the U.S. produce its own stuff. Let's see. Why don't we include the word maps here to try and refine the search just a bit better? Does this one do it? Hurricane storage? Oh, no. Storage site. Okay, so these red dots all along here. We have the Bryan Mound, Big Hill, West Hackberry, Bayou Choctaw. But as you can see, Texas has access to like half of it, and Louisiana has the other half. All of it is a pretty big deal. Anyhow, we can close that out. Go back to where we were. Nope. Moving on to this article, there is rising sentiment towards separation due to Biden administration's abuse of executive orders. Yeah, tons of it. Like the stuff with the COVID vaccines was bad enough, where you were mandating people to get it. And you have all this immigration stuff and everything else that's been upsetting people lately. Moving on. So this is more of an argument against it. Like Martin Armstrong, he just made the argument saying that, well, Texas can do it. It can be its own nation. How do you get that, though? Like, you're not just going to be able to peacefully secede. If you think you can, you're delusional. In his opinion, civil war is the win condition for the left in this culture war because that lets them destroy the Constitution, and they're correct. Like, the left wants to destroy the United States of America. We get a civil war, it's destroyed in some way or another, or at least it's permanently, it's going to be taken down and paid for a long time, and the Constitution is going to be trodden over because times of war, that's what happens. Anyhow, he's commenting on James Lindsay's post, and James Lindsay lays out a pretty good argument for why it's not a good idea. We're not going to go over too well, but I will scroll through it so you can pause it and read. Feel free to search him up on Twitter, because it's a great read in my opinion. Basically, he argues that no matter what you do, if you go down the secessionist route, you're going to lose. I don't know, he might be right, he also might be wrong. Like, I don't know how many factors he's taken into account. I mean, he's certainly taking into account cultural factors and political factors. But in terms of economics, I feel like the U.S. South would be fine. Like, all the old Confederate states, they'd be able to make it. There would be a huge sorting of the population going towards the red states and abandoning the blue states. And I think the blue states would wither and die over time. You just have to make sure you maintain a peace. Yes, there would be tons of sanctions, but what do the sanctions matter anyway? And plus, he also makes arguments about how the military is going to get upset. But again, that's assuming that you can mobilize the entire military or keep them all loyal to blue state America. There's going to be splits. And let's say there's an aircraft carrier and it happens to be under the control of people who are more conservative or traditional or right-leaning. Then blue state America shows up and says, we're going to give you orders. Why would they listen? They might just decide, you know what, we're going to sail our aircraft carrier to red state America and be there. Now, obviously, it's not that simple. Aircraft carriers have a bunch of other boats around them, but you catch the general drift. Now, to prevent that, I'm sure that all these positions are staffed with people who are very loyal to the regime. But again, like, what if most of the people on the boat want to be red state Americans? Doesn't really matter what the captain wants if the crew mutinies. So there are more factors that he's not taking into account. All of them very dangerous factors. But he also doesn't really seem to take into account economics. Like, he thinks that somehow the red states would get sanctioned by blue states in the rest of the world. Maybe, but I don't think so. I mean, sure, they would put on sanctions, and you would have a division of the world economy. But you're going to be left with essentially Europe that would go through with the sanctions, and the blue states. Who else is going to really follow the sanctions? You can't be certain about anyone else. Like, the BRICS nations might line up to say, hey, you know what, we want to trade with both, and that would give the U.S. or the red states access to tons of economic activity. The United States would lose out on that, or the blue states would. Anyhow, again, definitely scroll through it, give it some thought. It's the red states that make up the bulk of the military. Well, I shouldn't say the bulk, but a lot of it. The officer corps, they're definitely more left-leaning in my opinion, but again, a lot of the personnel, I think they're more right-leaning. So, no guarantees on how all this stuff shakes out. He also makes some comments about talking with Tim Pool. What was it I said? I think he said something about how he didn't really want to talk to them about it. Can't find it. Oh well. Doesn't matter. Only other concern I have is whether or not Texas is actually doing its job. This is something I intend to check out tomorrow. Alex Jones did a thing on InfoWars, basically saying that its border was still wide open, and that might be true, might not be perfectly defended, but I want to figure out exactly what he's saying. And Alex Jones has been right about a lot of things, but he's also wrong about a lot of things. Anyhow, thanks for listening. Consider liking and subscribing. I enjoy making these little episodes at night just because, well, I like talking about the news or what I've kind of been reading all day. Anyhow, have a good one. Bye.